Okay, let's dive right into this. Picture it. It's June 27th, 1976. Air France Flight 139 is taking off from Tel Aviv, heading for Paris with over 240 passengers on board. It starts off as just a perfectly normal, routine morning. But as you'll see within mere hours, this entirely ordinary flight morphs into one of the most unprecedented international hostage crises in history, one that is going to push geopolitical boundaries to their absolute breaking point. So, right off the bat, this presents us with a seemingly impossible dilemma. Think about it. How do you rescue over 100 hostages held 4,000 kilometers away? I mean, imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of that. These people aren't just being held against their will, they've been dragged deep into an unpredictable, highly hostile country. The clock is relentlessly ticking, the demands are severe, and the margin for error? It is literally zero. How in the world do you pull off a rescue when every single odd is stacked against you? Well, the nightmare actually begins with a shockingly simple mistake. After taking off from Israel, Flight 139 makes a totally standard scheduled stop in Athens. And right here, this is where a catastrophic security failure happens. At the Athens airport, a metal detector is just broken. On top of that, no one is even watching the X-ray screens. This massive lapse allows four terrorists carrying hidden guns and actual hand grenades in their cabin bags to just casually board the flight alongside 54 other transit passengers. And it doesn't take long for things to escalate. Just 8 minutes, literally 8 minutes after leaving Athens, the terror unfolds. Two hijackers sitting in first class suddenly jump up, armed with a pistol and a grenade, and they just storm the cockpit. They force the chief engineer and co-pilot out at gunpoint. The lead hijacker actually points his gun right at the pilot's head, forcing him to veer the plane south. Moments later, this chilling announcement echoes through the cabin over the intercom. This plane has been hijacked, and from now on, I am your captain, and this plane will be called Haifa. So in less than 3 minutes, the hijackers take absolute control of the entire aircraft. Now, what's really fascinating about this slide here is the radical alliance behind the whole thing. It makes this hijacking historically unique. You've got two members of the Palestinian PFLP, whose main goal is fighting against Israel, teaming up with two members of the German Revolutionary Cells, a group primarily focused on protesting Western coercion. It's the super unlikely, very radical alliance, but they're forged together for one single shared purpose: to force the release of their imprisoned comrades who are scattered in jails all over the world, but mostly in Israel. After a quick refueling stop in Libya, the plane is forced south again. And you can just imagine what the passengers are going through, right? The uncertainty alone breeds absolute powerlessness. When the plane finally touches down in Entebbe, Uganda, they don't exactly find a sanctuary. At the time, Uganda is ruled by Idi Amin, this highly unpredictable anti-Israel dictator who's surrounded by all sorts of terrifying rumors. So instead of finding safety, the passengers basically watch as Idi Amin plays this deceptive role of a mediator. Meanwhile, his own fully armed soldiers are actively helping the hijackers guard the hostages inside the airport's old terminal building. Once everyone is locked down in the terminal, the hijackers lay out their terrifying ultimatum. They want $5 million, and they demand the immediate release of 53 prisoners, 40 of whom are locked up in Israeli jails. They set a firm deadline for July 1st, which they later push back to July 4th. But then, they do something truly chilling. The hijackers collect everyone's passports and systematically begin separating the hostages. They segregate the Jewish and Israeli passengers into a completely separate room. As you can imagine, this move sent absolute shockwaves of terror through the group, bringing up some incredibly dark historical memories. Meanwhile, back in Israel, the war room is basically a pressure cooker. An intense ideological clash absolutely erupts. On one side, you have Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. He favors accepting the hijackers' demands because he's terrified for the hostages' lives, and he knows Idi Amin is playing a dangerous double game. But on the other side, Defense Minister Shimon Peres is adamant. He argues, very forcefully, that releasing terrorists is just going to invite future attacks and project global weakness. All the while, the families of the hostages are protesting outside, putting immense, unbelievable pressure on the government to find a solution. So the military is desperately brainstorming. Brigadier General Dan initially pitches three, honestly, pretty desperate options. A naval assault across Lake Victoria? Well, rejected, because the waters are literally infested with crocodiles. A paratrooper drop? Rejected. What about a Trojan horse using a regular civilian plane? Rejected. The fatal flaw with every single one of these plans was the exit strategy. They all kind of naively assumed that the unpredictable Ugandan army would somehow just let the Israelis leave peacefully after a massive shootout. Clearly, they needed something a whole lot better. But how on earth do you plan a highly complex assault completely blind? Well, it turns out the hijackers made a massive tactical error. They actually released a group of the non-Israeli passengers to Paris. Mossad jumped on this. They immediately interrogated them, figuring out exactly where the hijackers slept, what weapons they were holding, and where the guards were positioned. But here is the true miracle of this whole story. The old Entebbe terminal. It was actually built by an Israeli construction company called Solel Boneh, and they miraculously handed over the exact original architectural blueprints to the Israeli military. So now they knew the building inch by inch. But look, having great intelligence only gets you so far when you have to factor in this staggering distance, 4,000 kilometers. That is the massive, yawning gap between Israel and Uganda. To actually pull this off, a massive strike force would have to fly entirely under the radar. They'd need to move at dangerously low altitudes right over hostile territory, cut their communications completely black, and then navigate that final tense stretch with their lights completely switched off. It's just wild. To make this crazy 4,000-kilometer journey, the Israeli military selects exactly 4 heavily modified C-130 Hercules aircraft. Now, you might be wondering why this specific plane. Well, because the C-130 is an absolute workhorse. It can carry an incredibly heavy load, which they desperately needed for all the troops and gear, and it has this amazing ability to land swiftly and take off from incredibly short, unlit, and poorly maintained runways. Plus, the back doors can open directly in the air, allowing for lightning-fast unloading the absolute second the wheels hit the tarmac. Now, the way they distributed this tactical force across the planes was just brilliant. It's like something out of a heist movie. Plane 1 carried the main assault team, led by Commander Yoni Netanyahu. Plane 2 held a quick reaction team tasked with securing the new terminal against the Ugandan army. Plane 3 carried the reserves, and they had a very specific, explosive job, destroying Uganda's fighter jets. And finally, Plane 4 acted as the medical and evacuation support. Oh, and hovering miles away near Kenya were backup Boeing 707s acting as airborne command centers. They really thought of the whole shebang. And this brilliantly illustrates their craziest, most audacious idea yet, the Trojan convoy. The plan was to land silently in the dead of night, drop the cargo ramps, and drive out a black Mercedes flanked by Land Rovers. They actually used fake Ugandan license plates and flags to perfectly mimic Idi Amin's personal motorcade. The idea was to drive right up to the terminal at exactly 40 kilometers per hour, because that was Idi Amin's standard speed, and just casually bypass the Ugandan guards entirely. But, no plan survives contact with reality for sure. The Israelis had perfect architectural blueprints, right? But they had one tiny, fatal intelligence gap. Just days earlier, Idi Amin had switched things up and purchased a white Mercedes. So when a black Mercedes rolls up out of the darkness, the Ugandan sentries immediately get suspicious and raise their weapons. The commandos had to act. One of them took down a guard with a silenced shot. But then a commando in the trailing Land Rover fired an unsuppressed weapon, and that was it. That loud crack of gunfire shattered the silence, and the element of total surprise was completely gone. From there, it's absolute chaos. The commandos immediately ditch the vehicles and just sprint the final 300 meters while taking heavy fire from the airport tower. As they forcefully breach the terminal, tragedy strikes. Commander Yoni Netanyahu is fatally shot. But the team doesn't stop, not even for a single second. They burst right into the main hall, screaming, "Stay down," over their megaphones in both English and Hebrew. In this frantic, highly calculated burst of combat, they neutralized the hijackers, doing absolutely everything in their power to avoid hitting the terrified civilians caught in the crossfire. Let this number sink in. The entire operation lasted just 53 minutes on the ground. The intense combat phase? A mere 30 minutes. The sheer speed of Operation Thunderbolt is exactly what made it successful. It was executed with such blistering velocity that the Ugandan military couldn't even mount a coordinated counterattack before the hostages were already being loaded onto the extraction planes. Let's take a breath and look at the actual aftermath of those chaotic 53 minutes, because the toll was devastating and historic. 102 hostages were miraculously rescued and flown safely back to Israel. All 7 hijackers were killed. Now, despite having strict orders to avoid engaging local forces if possible, 45 Ugandan soldiers died in the firefight. Crucially, the strike team also destroyed 11 Ugandan MiG fighter jets on the runway, just to completely eliminate any chance of being pursued in the air. But tragically, 3 hostages were killed in the crossfire during that initial breach. In the wake of this incredible raid, the mission was officially renamed from Operation Thunderbolt to Operation Yonatan to honor the fallen commander, Yoni Netanyahu. His tragic heroism really united Israel in sympathy, and it actually paved the way for his brother, Benjamin Netanyahu, to eventually rise to the office of prime minister. But amidst the triumph, we definitely must solemnly acknowledge the tragedy of Dora Bloch. She was an elderly hostage who had been moved to a Ugandan hospital before the raid even happened. Tragically, she was left behind and cruelly murdered in retaliation by Idi Amin's regime. So, what does this all mean for us today? The smoke has long cleared at Entebbe, but a really profound question lingers. Operation Unitron remains the absolute boldest long-distance rescue in military history. But when innocent lives are hanging in the balance, caught entirely in geopolitical crossfires, is unilateral military intervention the ultimate solution? Or does it set a dangerous global precedent? I'll leave that for you to ponder. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.